Terees is a fragrance and flavor educator, perfumer, perfume collector, and purveyor. As creator of the first Scent Docent TM worldwide, Terees gives talks and creates sensory experiences on fragrance and flavor. Prior to starting FragranTed, Terees had an accomplished 22-year global business career working in executive positions for automotive and luxury goods companies. She led key roles in communications, human resources, marketing, executive development, and strategy at Ford, Jaguar, Nordstrom, and SEE Eyewear. She has lived and worked internationally for job assignments in Europe and Asia. She's a graduate of University of Michigan and Pennsylvania State University with a BA and an MBA degree, respectively. Terees now combines her love of the arts, business, nature, and global culture to bring beauty and joy to the senses. And that's a quote from her. So, wow. Thank you for joining us, Terees. It's quite a bio. And I think we'll start, if you're okay with that, just talking about how you came to perfumery after this sort of rich career in automotive and luxury goods company. What was it about perfumery that brought you to this field?
Well, I want to say thank you, Saskia, and having me to interview. And then I want to thank everyone for tuning in. I appreciate it. I don't know where you are in the world, but good afternoon or good evening or even good morning if you're on the other side of the world. How do I start? I guess the way I came to starting a profession and a career was by a career change. What had happened, I had this very accomplished career in corporate America. However, it got to the point where I just didn't feel fulfilled. I was feeling very stifled. And I was one of these, of course, people that I was accomplished. So many times what happens, as I would say, as the single woman, you get rewarded with more responsibilities and more positions, which is fine. But then it came to a point where I was at this crossroad. My last position, I was Human Resources Director for Asia, Pacific, and Africa. And I was based in Dearborn, but I traveled out to the region. And they were restructuring and they wanted me to move to China. And I just couldn't do it because the culture there is very much work hard, work hard, work hard. And I really just couldn't do it. So I made the shocking decision and to leave the company. I actually asked for a buyout. So we can even talk about that in terms of asking for what you want. But anyway, that was in 2008. So I decided to leave the company. It was very shocking because I did it very quietly. And of course, you can imagine people were very shocked that all of a sudden I'm just not there the next day. But anyway, that was just my terms. I wanted to just walk out quietly. But during that time in 2008, my father, who was passed on then, he was still alive, but he had gotten ill. And so I decided to take a sabbatical. But then I was thinking, okay, I need to go back to work. And I went and hired a career coach. Long story short, career coaches talking to me, and I get in a tangent on perfumery for some reason. And she says, Terees, I know 1,000 people and nobody has talked to me about perfumery the way you did. So it was basically, I had an aha moment in a coaching session, and she just asked a simple question on why you're not doing something in perfumery, and it stuck, and I got it, and I said, okay, I will. And it's been a long journey since that was about 2009, but I started from a career coaching session.
So what was your first step? I mean, so what was your first?
I've always had a love affair with scent and perfumery. When I was working in corporate America, I would just going to the fragrance counter was just a sense of stress relief. And then I had also, when I was working during that time, I went to Sniffapalooza conferences. You probably know about
the Karens. Those ladies are amazing.
Yeah. So I started going, I was going to those back in 2006. So I was familiar with it. And then interesting, during my corporate career, I lived internationally. I worked for Jaguar Cars in the UK for 3 years. And it was really interesting because I could travel a lot from that job. And rather than, hanging out in the airport lounge, I would go to the duty-free shop because the duty-free shop there in Europe had many different fragrances. So it was always about exploration. So I had this hobby and interest. And what I did to start my business, I actually started in custom perfumery in my basement through a contact on someone I met at Sniffapalooza. There was a woman, people may know Sue Phillips. At that time, company was with the Perfume Studio. So I decided to try to do custom perfumery. I was using her products. It was very, very short-lived because I'm a highly spiritual person, and I didn't want to use somebody else's products. I was being led to create my own, and I knew I wanted to have closer relationships with suppliers. So I did that for a little bit using somebody else's products, but I shut that down because it just wasn't the path. And then I actually went and took a job at Nordstrom's selling fragrances.
Oh man, you learn a lot when you're at the perfume
counter, on the front
right?
line there. And kind of fast forward for that, my heart kind of got off the trails, but then in 2016, I started back to, I was always ordering materials and playing around, but I got serious and started creating my own fragrances and having a business called FragranTed.
Did you ever feel, were you confident as you made that transition, I guess?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I thought you were going to say absolutely, yeah. And absolutely not.
Absolutely not. And what happened, like I said, I was in my basement and I got more confident and moved up to my kitchen table. So what happened is that at my church, I want to say probably 2016, 2017. Everybody knew me around Detroit that I love perfume. Either I was wearing something, interesting, or I was talking about essential, materials. So what happened at my church, they had a women's retreat and they said, okay, Terees, we'd like you to come and speak about perfumery from a spiritual standpoint. So it was one of those things like, oh my goodness, I've got to create something. So what happened, like I said, the movement was up to my kitchen table and I wanted them to experience fragrance. So then I created something. So basically it's a lifelong process. At first when I was starting, I was just focusing on citrus, orange. I did read the Jean Carl method. So each step I started going from individual blending, just focusing on the notes. Then in 2017, that's when I got everything incorporated and I really started creating fragrances and scents, but they were still based on people understanding, jasmine and rose, because I find that's where my niche is in my business, is that people from the Midwest really don't have an appreciation for the individual ingredients because they're so used to them in a commercial department store. So that's how I started building.
So, it's interesting because a lot of perfumers, I think, face this challenge where people will say, "Oh, I like jasmine," and then that's sort of where it ends. Like, as a perfumer, a lot of what you do is educating people too, right? Would you agree?
And that's actually when you were talking about my business, FragranTed. It's a combination word. Part of it, I mentioned earlier that my father passed away. And I really knew I wanted to do something as a tribute to him because part of my story is that my father traveled a lot on business and he would bring my mom and I back bottles of perfume. Now I'm 10 years old wearing First by Van Cleef & Arpels because my dad's probably that classic businessman, 5 minutes before going to the airport has to get a gift and gets talked into buying a 10-year-old First by Van Cleef & Arpels. But anyway, since he passed, and he really introduced me a lot. Downtown Detroit has a Renaissance Center building, and there was a niche perfume shop when I was in high school. And so sometimes on Saturdays, we would go there and just walk around and he would buy fragrance. So anyway, I knew I wanted to do something as a tribute to my father. So FragranTed is a combination word. It's the word fragrant and the word ED, which is short for education. And the capital T is actually my father's name. His name was Ted. That was his name.
Oh, that's really lovely.
So a lot of people think the T is because of my name. So I know that I wanted, to me, fragrance represents a legacy, not just for me and my business, but for people, because it's what we say salage in the industry, but really a scent is what you leave behind, the memory. So yes, going back to your question about education, I started back then in 2017, and actually from 16 with the church different groups, I started doing pop-up shops and workshops that were integrating learning about scent and stories. So my business is rooted in education. I want my tagline, I always say, learn to savor scent. You know, take that time to be with the smell and see how it reacts. What are you feeling? What are you experiencing?
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, it is such an embodied experience, right? And just a quick interjection, Bayana, hi Bayana, she did a talk with us, gosh, a couple months ago about flavors, but Bayana shares that she loves the name and honoring excellence and heritage. So just
Yes.
sharing that compliment.
Yes. And it's interesting, and thank you, because I watched Bayana, and it's interesting because during the last year of my father's life, we talked about family stories, and my cousin's on the line. I gotta say hi to cousin Vicky.
Hi, cousin Vicky.
And well, when we get to this, it's interesting because she's a long lost cousin. So we get to this, we'll talk about how we've connected through my perfume story. But anyway, my great grandmother, this is like all of a family business. My great grandmother was a florist in Alabama. Very similar story to me. She was by profession a college professor, but she was a gardener. She had a master garden, and then after she retired, she had a floral shop, and she did the flowers for the Black community. She was in Alabama, and in the South, when someone passes away during probably like the 40s and the 50s, it was prior 50s on up, they would put a black wreath of flowers on the door, and that was to symbolize that somebody had passed away. And then, of course, flowers at the funeral. So it is a full generational heritage business in terms of paying tribute to my ancestors and my heritage.
Yeah, I mean, you already spoke about legacy, but I mean, that is quite a legacy, isn't it? Like a florist. I mean, and then your father with the duty. I mean, how do you address sort of your place in that lineage? You know, I mean, your place obviously is to represent the legacy, but also create your own. I mean, what would you want your legacy to be, you know?
Oh gosh, that's a beautiful question. I definitely want my legacy to be about that. When I say that I've brought beauty, I'm not talking just about the superficial, but that I've brought beauty and kindness to the world and joy, and that I've uplifted others. So I do see that my legacy continues on from my family, but I'm doing it through scent. So I think my legacy definitely continues on through them, and the way that I'm doing it is through scent, by these principles of education, through scent flowers, and have taken it to a perfumery standpoint.
Yeah. So in a way, you're sort of taking all that your family has brought to you and putting it in a way that is something you can easily present. It's
Yes.
It's a bottle of something beautiful, but it represents so much more, of course. So
absolutely, and that's where, now that my business has now evolved and I've got a line of 6 fragrances, that my story, and when you talked about earlier, this is a journey. I'm nowhere near where I want to be in terms of a perfumer, and I'm okay with that, because I think that's the beauty of perfumery, is that it is, I mean, I love it. It's a constant journey. It's a constant discovery of new ingredients. In fact, there's something, I've got my blotters, I'm working on some fixatives, because I primarily work in about 70% natural, 70 and above. And as naturals, they're not gonna stay with you. So I'm experimenting with some base fixatives.
So let's talk a little bit about your practice. Actually, it's a good segue. So what was the first perfume that you made where you felt like, okay, this is something I can put on the market. I can sell. I feel confident. What was that perfume?
Yeah, it's interesting because I would say it really came in terms of last year, that for Valentine's Day, I did it's interesting because going back to, it's interesting, for that church retreat, the theme was awesome, amazing. It was about women, in your life in Christ, you can be awesome and amazing by being a Christian woman. So I created a scent called Awesome Amazing. It was, it was some orange, peppermint, the basic orange, peppermint, lavender. I mean, the women loved it because
Nice.
these are all the little symbols and messages along my path. They liked it because it was just something that wore close to them, and that it was uplifting, energizing, but comforting. Anyway, I would say last year was the first year where I felt, okay, I'm proud of what I created. I did a pop-up shop for Valentine's Day, and I did, surprise, surprise, decided to do a rose collection. So I did a Turkish, I wanted my concept of my line, which is called Gentle, and we can get into this later and why that's a little bit separate. But my business is all about pairing the familiar with the unfamiliar and unexpected. So I did a basic rose fragrance, which was like a Bulgarian, Moroccan, and Egyptian rose. Then I paired Peruvian pepper with rose. I also did Haitian vetiver in rose. And I also did Turkish fig in rose. And the reason for that, now you may be like, okay, not anything earth-shattering. But again, I'm in the Midwest area where, yes, people love perfumery, but there really is not a real exposure and introduction to ingredients. And people love, I mean, the Haitian vetiver and rose, people were like, amazing. And of course you're inside going like, really? But,
Totally.
So I would say that was last year, the first year where it's like, I feel good. I'm proud of what I'm bringing because it's filling a need. And the second thing that made me really feel good, because I was doing pop-up shops from 2016 to 2017. Many times, you're doing these pop-up shops. And again, I'm in the Midwest. People see you with a table of fragrances and they're like, get away. I'm not going to stop. But I would still try to engage someone because now my line is all perfume oil. So I made a conscious decision because, again, the principles of my business, I really want something soft on the skin. But anyway, women would say, no, I don't want to smell. And then I would just give them a little sample, just try. And a woman came back and said, wow, I'm not sneezing, and bought a bottle. And it kind of happened. So I've evolved now that my education business is FragranTed. My line of fragrances is called Gentle, but it's spelled differently.
And the reason Genteil, right?
Yes. Yeah. And the reason, again, I'm paying tribute to family heritage. The TE is for Dad, Ted, and then IL is my mom's name is Willa. So the two middle initials Willa. But there's a concept because gentle on the skin. So all of my fragrances now that I've evolved, they're soothing scents. They're made with baobab oil. So my business is really now, I've been able to hone in by getting out there, putting myself out there when I was afraid, wasn't confident, that now I know that my business is about soothing scents using indigenous ingredients, and I'm telling stories from the Black diaspora. So I've now renamed some of my fragrances, but they're all based on stories and paired to stories from African culture, Caribbean culture, and African American culture.
Which is, I mean, like good, it's about time. So let's talk a little bit about culture and perfume. And you and I are both active, in this topic. So I know we're speaking to like-minded individuals. But so how did you decide that the stories you wanted to tell were from the Black diaspora, or the African diaspora? What was it about those stories that you felt needed to be told now?
I mean, part of it because, again, from a perfumery standpoint, we just hear about perfumery from France. Everything, you might hear a blip on the screen about Egypt, and then boom,
totally.
People, their leather gloves were stinky, so they needed something to do with the leather gloves, and then the explosion of modern perfumery. And through, my studies, there was something that was always with me saying, wait, what's going on here? Because not even just from perfumery, even when I study individual notes and ingredients, it will say, just saying, okay, jasmine is native to India. And then the story jumps to, and I always say this facetiously, the story jumps to Sir Walter Raleigh and what Sir Walter Raleigh did with the whole jasmine industry or the cinnamon industry. And in my mind, I'm like, wait a minute, what happened from the indigenous ingredient to Sir Walter Raleigh making millions of dollars on this indigenous ingredient? So that's where I decided I want to get in that gap between the initial indigenous ingredient and kind of what happened. So that's why, so for instance, my initial fragrance on bergamot and grapefruit, I've renamed it to be Barbados grapefruit because grapefruit is indigenous to Barbados.
That's, yeah. I mean, these are stories. You're right. I mean, you're so right that you hear like, oh yeah, this Haitian vetiver, and then you hear like, oh, and this French perfumer did all this beautiful stuff, and you're like, well, what about the Haitian vetiver? Like, what about the Haiti in this Haitian vetiver? So yeah.
What happened to the 200? What happened? And then also, yes, we know so much about the roots of perfumery that Africa, Asia, Southeast Asia, South America, Mexico, all of these continents had rich scent fragrance practices way before modern perfumery. So I want to raise those stories. And this is what has happened over this last 2 years that I've now, my fragrances now are paired in sharing scents through the diaspora experience.
That's fantastic. For a short time in LA, I worked for a friend of my father's, James Burks, ran a nonprofit called the African Marketplace, and I worked in a shop that was devoted to products from the African diaspora. This is years and years ago, and what struck me about it is the wealth of stories and, the diversity of histories that you in mainstream sort of Western, let's say North American culture tends to be sort of watered down, and it's cool that there's this current movement to really exploding and expanding and giving those stories equal weight with like Louis XIV or whoever, so.
And it's interesting, Saskia, because I had, like when I said I was first starting out and I had, French lavender, very revolutionary, right? However, I've now renamed that. It's called Langston lavender after Langston Hughes. And the connection is there was a period around in the 1920s when many African-American Harlem Renaissance creatives lived in France. Langston Hughes.
That's right, in the south of France, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So again, I want to share Black history from the diaspora in different ways. And it not only is just something pulling me, honestly, I'm here at this point. I mean, we know over, I guess, so much has happened, but probably was it June timeframe where we had Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, even was it Christian? There's so many people I can't. We know Black people over this summer had been killed and shot down senselessly. And what happened, of course, trying to reconcile all of this, many people were elevated in terms of perfumery. And what happened, it took a lot to process because after kind of this thing went out, like we need Black perfumers, I got a lot of DM messages, emails, and it was overwhelming. And I remember telling my mom that I actually feel a little guilty. You know, I feel horrible that many people had to die for there to be a recognition. And I remember my mom, you know, this is kind of through history, because as an African-American person voting, especially in the South, and I don't know if I mentioned it, I was born in Alabama, but voting, you were always being told you must vote, because people had to die. And as a little girl, or as a young voter, or even children now, you may tell them that, and they don't quite understand. But anyway, to make the point is that I really fully, truly believe that the more we can understand each other's stories, the more we can understand and share our culture, the more connection we have. And this is my way of doing it through Scent, by sharing stories of the Black diaspora, that in my way of the world, let's try to come together and learn and appreciate each other's cultures more.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard the catch in your voice, and it's a lot of friends of mine were expressing similar feelings of like, good Lord, like what did it take to get to this point, you know?
So I now, you know, I want to bring goodness to the world, and use my abilities through Scent to share stories and let's talk about it. Because before COVID, I did Scent sessions around Detroit. So I did it, I partnered with, there's Source Booksellers. There's an independent owned African-American bookseller. Janet's been wonderful in hosting me. So we would do Scent sessions where, you know, I would have a theme. Like one time I had a rose and chocolate theme. One time I had a theme on flowers around the world and smelling, and different people coming together. And it's interesting because someone shares about their grandmother's rose bush, and then another person is sharing the same thing. So the more we can come together and share, that's to me what FragranTed is going to be giving to this world, to heal us and to connect us.
So tell me a little bit about your line of 6 that you started with. What are maybe 1 or 2 highlights of the stories that you're basing them on? Or...
So, okay, I told you that there's still 6, but they've been renamed. So the Bee Rose now, these are my bottles here. The Bee Rose is called now Motown Rose. And as you know, I'm here in Detroit. So, you know, Motown industry was, you know, as you know, about the R&B. And there were so many, you know, grand divas from Diana Ross. Now, Aretha Franklin was not a Motown artist, but we claim her as our own.
Fair enough. I mean,
right, exactly. But I wanted to pay honor to the women of that time who were very elegant and classy and, you know, typical females, but they were rooted and grounded. So that's one. The Turkish fig stays the same. And then we have the Haitian vetiver and rose, which is again, a combination of rose and Haitian vetiver, but it's also has a little sweetness. So I've put some tonka bean in there. So again, most people think about of course, the impoverished state of Haiti, but many people have no idea about the Haitian vetiver market and its impact. So those are the stories around that. I'm working on 3 new scents that are going to be paying tribute to Alabama, where I was born. There's something I want to do with Africa. And then there's a historic neighborhood in Detroit that I'm going to be paying a tribute to in Scent.
That's fantastic. Tell me about Detroit. I love Detroit, you know, so first of all, when did you, how long have you been there? Have you been there for a long time now?
Yeah, we moved here when I was 9.
Okay, so you're a Detroit lady.
Yeah, so I'm a Detroiter, even though even between, you know, we left the South when I was 6 months old. My dad went to graduate school, and we lived a couple other places, but I'm a Detroiter.
Yeah. So what is it about Detroit that sort of, you and I have spoken about this sort of over email a little bit, like there's specific opportunities and there's a very specific creative landscape in Detroit. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I think the best I can do, I'm going to give you a little historical and then, present. I think one thing, I'm a child of the 70s, and I grew up in a time of Detroit when, Detroit is a Black city, but it's beyond, most people think of Detroit, old Detroit, of just the murder capital. But I have to tell you, Detroit, now my family came to Detroit in the 70s. And before that, in the 40s and 50s, there were Black hospitals. I think like 11 Black hospitals in Detroit. Detroit was a thriving Black middle class, Black middle upper class community where you had Black businesses, Black hospitals, attorneys, that were thriving. Even by the 70s, when I came here, we had our Black mayor. And I grew up in a community, Lafayette Park, which was I grew up in a kind of a utopia environment. It was integrated, probably 50, white, 50% Black. One of the first architectural firms, the owners, who was the architect, lived in the neighborhood. We had just a melting pot of communities. So old Black Detroit, we had the automotive industry and then the Motown. So Detroit, as they say, has a lot of grit that, people just are just vibrant, that we don't stop, we just keep going. So unfortunately, of course, decline, we had, white flight to the suburbs, and everything started going to suburbs. And of course, many things in the downtown area started to decline. But however, yes, the city has now come back, and there is a big resurgence. The downtown area, pre-COVID, lots of restaurants. We have Le Labo on Woodward Avenue, which is our main restaurant, a lot of dining, of course, Shinola. And then we have a thriving creative community. This is like the generation behind me, or two generations behind me, where there's lots of artists, musicians, filmmakers. We've got the murals all over. So Detroit is kind of one of these hidden jewels beyond just what you hear about from automotive and music. There's a lot of Black, not just Black, there's just a lot of creative energy in Detroit.
One of my good friends here in LA he runs a thing called Industry Opera. It's an opera company, independent opera company, and he just relocated to Detroit to take over, I guess, the Detroit Opera or something.
Oh,
so
okay.
I'll introduce you, but he's been talking a lot about really loving the city and the energy.
Yeah.
And my experience there was also there was a lot of creative energy when I went to visit.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You think about Motown started, Berry Gordy's house. And just that, the talent that's here. So, Detroit still has a lot of amazing singers. And another thing is, like I said, there was a thriving middle class, not just, of course, Black, but just middle class in general. There are beautiful homes, because you have to understand, when the automotive industry was in its heyday, someone working on the line, a line worker making the cars was making $100,000.
Wow.
Overtime and everything. They were able to buy homes. They were able to send their kids to college. So what we understand in Detroit, and then, unfortunately, when the automotive industry, they say, catches a cold, the rest of the city catches pneumonia, because it affects the doctors, it affects schools and everything. So it's like a trickle down effect.
Right.
But I would have to say there is we do have the new Detroit. It's been some mourning. I would say mourning. I'll say it for me, mourning, because Detroit used to have a spirit. It used to have a grit where if you go downtown, to me, I don't know if I'm in Detroit. I don't know if I'm in Seattle. that kind of all of this urban planning has now made,
Right.
I think, major cities all the same.
The same, totally. Yeah.
Where in the past, Detroit looked different from LA, that looked different from Philly, that looked different from Pittsburgh, where now Detroit downtown is kind of probably looks like an LA downtown. So I think that's the thing. And of course, all of the investment went in. I'm sorry to get on a soapbox.
No, I love it. This is one of my favorite topics. So,
the investments went down into the city. And like, for instance, I live 15 minutes outside the city. So, I'm Detroit adjacent, but I still have my downtown roots. I still claim myself as downtown, but, driving from my house into the city, you're going through some really rough abandoned areas. So there's been some growing pains and people feeling left behind or not, apart, even my mom's, neighborhood that it used to be, like a 50-50 white black community. It's now probably 80% white. And I think what it is, it's just more of people feeling that they're missing not feeling appreciated and valued anymore
in their city. Yeah. I mean, I'm from San Francisco originally, and similar issues going on, where when I was growing up, it was a very mixed and, just a very mixed city. And then, like Detroit, like you get these sort of urban planners and the gentrification, and suddenly, there's no room for people who aren't, down with that, so. And it's kind of heartbreaking.
That's why I want to chronicle these scent stories. So the next series, I've got one fragrance that will be dedicated to this community. I'll tease it. There's this Paradise Valley Black Bottom community. So I want to chronicle these stories through scent.
Have you thought of also doing sort of documentary or writing around each scent? Because if you're chronicling the history through scent, which is amazing, like I feel like it could really lend itself to like a multidisciplinarian approach, maybe.
That's a great idea. I have in my card, I have a little synopsis of a scent story that describes it, but of course there's much more. You're so right. That's a great idea, Saskia.
Hey. And so I get paid not $100,000 a year, the little bucks of the nonprofit. But no, because I find this really interesting, and these sort of these human histories, they need to be recorded because otherwise they disappear. And to use scent as the lens seems super fascinating. So, do you think Detroit is a place that is ripe for sort of to be an artisan perfume capital, or?
Absolutely. In fact, I'm like I said, education. I love learning, and when I traveled, and I want to say it already was. I didn't know that when I went to Grasse, France, I went to the FragranTed Museum, and of course I'm like in the museum. Long story short, I see this letter it was called Seeley, the American perfumer. And he was based in Detroit, Michigan, that FragranTed obviously was ordering some ingredients and materials from Seeley. So this was back in the early 1900s. Seeley was a distributor of perfumery ingredients based here in downtown Detroit. So we've done it before, so we're going to resurrect it again.
That's really cool. So there's history for perfume in Detroit.
Yeah, and I would have to say there are 5 artisan perfumers that I know of already here in Detroit.
No
There's
kidding.
another company. Yeah, there's another company that's doing very well. Sufumato. I think it's SFU.
Yeah, I think I know who you're talking.
Yes.
I think I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
Kevin and Jane, I've taken classes with them. Their concept is they match perfumery to cocktails. So they actually, have an in-person immersion experience where they also have a bar, a craft cocktail bar, and they create fragrances around craft cocktails. And then there's another guy he's actually an hour and a half from Detroit, but we'll still claim him as Detroit. Kerosene, do you know Kerosene?
Oh yeah, of course, totally.
Yeah, he's I think he's like an hour and a half, but so there is this community, and I think it's great to come together.
Yeah, that's That's cool. Maybe we should hold our next awards in Detroit. Wouldn't that be cool?
Do it.
I always want to hold the awards places I want to spend time. So, and
Yeah.
Detroit's always, I had a boyfriend who went to Ann Arbor years ago, and we spent, and his sister lived in
Right.
Detroit. So anyway.
And then I would have to say, because what happened, just to kind of tell you a story. Also, when I moved back from England in, what was it, 2003? Anyway, I was trying to find fragrance, and then the times when I couldn't go to Sniffapalooza, I couldn't find anybody teaching fragrance in Detroit at that time. But then Ann Arbor, Michigan, that's where University of Michigan is. There's a woman, you may know, Michelle Crowell Kidd.
Yeah, the name definitely rings a bell.
She lives in Ann Arbor, so she's about an hour and a half from me. She teaches some classes there. So, I just kind of would find people along the way to strengthen my knowledge.
That's cool. Tell me something. This is a little bit off topic, but you mentioned a couple times that you're a Christian woman, you're a spiritual person. How do you equate scent with your belief? Because a lot of people have spiritual associations with scent, but I know only one other person in our little world who identifies as a Christian and as a perfumer. So I'm curious about how you integrate your faith into your practice as a perfumer.
I can tell you, Saskia, my practice is my communion, that when I get at this table, I get into flow with God. And I cannot tell you times where maybe I'm stressed on something or something else is troubling me, but I've got a project. Because another thing is I do custom perfumes also. And there was a custom project. I'll get into this later if we have a time. But anyway, when I get at my organ, you can see a peek on my organ, some of it. And then there's a window that's open. I get into God. So through my Christian process, I am able to get flow. I am able to connect. And I think working with naturals, I'm not one of these, God's not like one of these big voices. God is here. God is with my jasmine when I'm using jasmine. He's with my natural ingredients. It's the relationship through scent. So it's hard to describe. I don't know if I'm explaining it well.
I think I understand. Yeah. I mean, it's really, so basically God is in all things, and your materials are therefore part of God, right?
And when you talked about what is it that I'm trying to represent, at the end of the day, if I could say what I want someone to feel, when someone's wearing a gentle scent, I want them to feel joy. I want them to feel peace and to feel comfort, to feel beauty. When I say, not say, okay, beautiful from the aesthetic. So if I could say, I don't necessarily say, okay, my products are Christian, but if your experience, when people tell me, gosh, Terees, I feel calm when I wear your scents. I feel pretty when I wear your scents. Then to me, that's a holy practice. That's what I'm charged to do.
That's amazing. Yeah, I love asking people who are spiritual about that, because it makes it so much richer, in a way, then I'm making a product and it's going to be for this market,
Yes. And actually, Saskia, I would have to say that was one of maybe the slow pace of my business, because I took entrepreneur classes because Detroit had a lot of investments. There was a lot of opportunity to take entrepreneur classes. And it was hard because you're right. I always knew I was mission led with my business. And it was hard because some people don't get it. They're like, well, how much perfume are you selling? And it's like, I'm trying to make an impact in the world. And really at the end of the day, I'm trying to bring more thoughtfulness and wonder in the world. And, many times business people are not getting it. It's like, well, is this going to sell?
Yeah,
so
totally.
Anyway,
it's such a different approach, though.
Yeah,
It's like there's that and there's this,
It is slow.
Yeah.
This hasn't been easy. Like I said, this has been a journey. It's been tough, some really tough, shedding many a tears. But I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing, and the pace is okay.
Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I am also, mission led, so I totally get it. But I do know that certainly it makes for a little bit of a harder life, maybe,
Oh
or
yeah.
maybe not. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think about that. I do compare myself. Like, well, I mean, yes, the corporate world was amazing. I enjoyed the great life. It was but I was not doing my soul's desire. Now I am doing my soul's desire, and I'm really having an impact on people. So I do. I mean, I'm thankful for both, and I enjoy this side. I really do.
Oh, I'm glad you're doing it. Guys, we have about 10 more minutes, and I want to make sure that we have time for questions if anybody has any. So just giving you a little shout out that now's a good time to pop a question in the chat, or feel free to unmute yourself and ask directly as well. Otherwise, I can keep asking. Don't worry, I got no problem asking questions myself. But Hannah said in the chat, they shared that they thought my practice is my communion was a very powerful statement. So, and then to Donna, I wanted to ask a little bit more about the baobab oil that you use. And we had a woman called Batupe who I think spoke about this more recently at the Institute for our Experimental Scent Summit. But would you share a little bit about why you use baobab? And
Yes, I mean, as I mentioned, I really honed in that I wanted to elevate and share stories from the African diaspora. So baobab oil the one I'm using is from Senegal. And if you're not familiar with the baobab tree, it's considered the tree of life because they're massive trees that are grown beyond just Senegal, but many places in Africa, that they can live up to 500 years. So baobab is a little bit more expensive oil, and I'm not using it 100%. I do a blend that I mix with organic fractionated coconut oil, but I decided to use baobab for two reasons. Number one, because it aligns to the brand that I'm trying to do for African and Black diaspora. And number two, it has amazing properties for the skin. And that's why I decided to add baobab into my fragrances.
quite moisturizing, I believe,
Yes,
right? Yeah.
yes.
Bayana has a question. Perfumes can take a long time to create. What was the longest time it took you to make a scent, and what was the shortest?
Oh my goodness. Bayana, I don't think I'm ever done. I think even when I release it, I'm like, oh, I could have tweaked this and tweaked that. I'm really impatient. So what I try to do is, take away the time of separating out your materials and making your dilutions. I do try to at least within one day come up with the initial foundation of something. So that's going to be about 8 hours, stopping and everything. I would say in terms of tweaking and then letting it sit and rest, the shortest has probably been about 6 months. And then the longest, but again, I'm still selling these. And the longest has probably been about a year and a half. But I try to stay around like the 3 to 6 months because I'm impatient. I like to get my things out into the world, and then I just continue to tweak. So I say these are limited editions.
You have a high level of attention to detail, I think.
I do.
6 months as your shortest is amazingly long. I'm impressed,
because it's so, like for instance, I work on a custom fragrance, and there's this it's going to be launching with someone that I did, and she's fine with me telling. It's called the Sister Accord. However, I wanted to add more fixatives. And, I kind of quickly put the fixatives and sent them to her. And then, of course, 3 weeks, one she picked, but 3 weeks later, they blended together and they came together and they just smelled amazing. So, you know how it is. The longer something sits, the better it smells. But
yeah, it's a weird, I know. I'm very impatient, so it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
So Felicia's asking, what is the most interesting fragrance you have created? Which is probably a hard question to answer.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I'm still in the process. I would say that the most interesting is something that I did not expect. I had this Turkish fig and rose, and fig is one of my favorite notes, and I really wanted it to smell very green, with that powdery rose note. But it's interesting, it ended up smelling like cotton candy. Somehow it turned to a very fruity, sweet note. And I would say that's been the most creative fragrance that I did not expect. And I might have to rename that one because it does not at all represent the rose. It's very sweet. So that's been the most creative one.
And what was that? What's the name of that perfume right now?
Turkish fig and rose.
That's okay. That's
rose. Turned it out to smell more like cotton candy. But in this market, people like it. So, but I'm gonna see when you talk about my practice, I'm actually going to rename that one to Turkish fig and honey because it's so sweet smelling.
Yeah, I mean, you have the right to rename whatever you want whenever you want. It's. I have a question which is a little bit self-serving because as I mentioned to you before everyone got on, we are launching a radio show in January, and our first radio show is about location and smell. So I'm going to ask Terees a question which we will then use on the radio show, which hopefully you find interesting as well, which is, Terees, I'm curious if you could answer what Detroit smells like to you.
What does Detroit smell like? I'm going to give you from this classic, iconic view of Detroit. Definitely since Detroit, it was part of the Motor City, you would have some, gasoline, gasoline smell to it. Then, with the Motown part in the women and the classiness, I would probably have some, feminine, rose smell with some floral smell with a little pomade because the men of the Motown area in their processed hair. So I would have a little, pomade oily smell and a little alcohol too, because they were very much into grooming. And then I'm going to add in a little grit because Detroit rises from the ashes. So I would also add in some was it geosmin, the note, or terrasols? So something that's going to give you some grind and grit. So it's going to be something that's, powerful, but smooth, but strong. That's what Detroit smells like.
I love it. So cool. Well, guys, we're about at time. These talks always go so quickly, and this one is no exception. And I wish we had another hour with Terees because I feel like there's a lot more we can talk about. But I think we have plans to collaborate on.
Saskia, can I add, because I am Analog Annie, so I'm just seeing some comments here. I don't have a website right now. There is something coming because I've been blessed. My business, I've been able to build it by word of mouth, but I do need a website. But follow me on Instagram at FragranTed, and you can stay connected with me.
Well, cool. Well, so yeah, so thanks everyone for joining us. And as I mentioned at the top of this hour, we're going to be putting this on the internet for posterity. So definitely, check it out and share it. Terees, you're cool. I'm excited about your work. I really think it's cool what you're doing. There's this very uniquely American thing about the Detroit stories, but also the African diaspora stories and all that. So, I'm sure all of us will be keeping an eye and following you with love and support.
Thank you. I really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Reach out on Instagram, and I wish everyone success, and just put yourself out there and just keep tweaking and editing, and you'll get what you want.
Terees, thanks so much for your time. And for all of you on the East Coast, good night. On the West Coast, good evening. And we'll see you, I guess, on the internet.
Okay. Bye.
Have a great evening, everyone.
Bye.